Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Journey to the Overland Designer Series. Today this is going to be a response video to DM Scotty's video that he recently put up indicating that you could have more fun playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I will extrapolate that to role-playing games in general if you remove the money. Now, I think the overwhelming majority of comments on his video, people disagreed, right? I think, and there was a lot of great reasons put in there as to why people totally thought this was either a bad idea or kind of a stupid idea, right? And I enjoy DM Scotty and everything that he does, but I'm going to kind of make the case for those group of people in the comments, because I noticed when they did the comments, DM Scotty would give you a hearts up if you agreed with him, and if you didn't agree with him, he'd simply ignore you. So, as not to be ignored, and as a fellow game designer, a role-playing game designer, not necessarily D&D, I'm going to make the case for why you could never eliminate money and wealth from a role-playing, or in particular, a fantasy role-playing game. Now, the first reason that you could never eliminate money and wealth from a fantasy role-playing game is because, as one commenter said, it's kind of, if fantasy role-playing is a reflection on life in general, it's a reflection on a world in general, and the majority of these worlds are basically models of our own world, right? It's what if our world had these elements. The problem you would have with removing money in the game, right, and to a greater extent removing even wealth in a game, in a fantasy setting, is you immediately eliminate probably the root of every conflict in your society. You immediately create a society where there is no necessity to do anything. If somebody is going to give you things, if stuff is generally free, if you can kind of, work your way into getting whatever you need without any kind of money or wealth, which is basically a measure of your resources in life, then what is the purpose of conflict? Why does the evil wizard want to control everybody? Right? And you can say, well, he just wants to control everybody because he's a bad person and he wants them to all do what he tells them to do. Well, what is he going to tell them to do? Right? I mean, what is he going to tell them to do? What is it that he cannot get for free that he needs to take over the world to get to dominate or to control? Right? Why do you need governments? Why do you need kingdoms? If you have a society where there is no such thing as money or wealth, you have a conflict-free society. Now, for many of us in Christianity, we believe in a world to come where there will be no money. But the whole definition of this world to come is it's going to be a world without conflict. And in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, and in most role-playing games, the conflict is the game, right? The conflict is the game. It's as one commenter indicated. She said, I want to have the money because I like the challenge of trying to be a hero and save people and help the world, but without starving or going broke in the process, right? That is an innate conflict. Not only is it the conflict, and this is the second reason, it is the incentive, right? And just about every role-playing game that is set in the fantasy world now, and if you extrapolate it, you can even go sci-fi worlds where you change money to credits. But it is the incentive, right? The first thing you think about when you think of going into a dragon's lair is he's laying on big piles of gold, right? The first thing you think about when you go adventuring and you find some precious jewels or some opulent armor or sword is how much it's worth, right? And then from there you decide, okay, with this kind of money, we can be power brokers. With this kind of money, I can retire, right? I can retire from adventuring. But if you take that incentive out, and this is kind of what DM Scotty implies, well, he says you can just be heroes and, you know, you did such a great job, the blacksmith's going to make you a new suit of armor, right? The town's going to let you have this building as your headquarters, right? The king is just going to fief you a castle. So essentially you become heroes for handouts, right? Everybody in the game world is a hero for a handout, right? We're all running around adventuring, and then we come back and say, okay, now what do I get? Right? You know, you become a hero for a handout. And in a world like that, then yeah, I guess so. There's no need for money because once again, there's no conflict, right? Everybody just waits to get a handout. But I think in a world where we talk about legends and we talk about epics, it is the very people who disregard the wealth or disregard the lack of wealth to do a mission, to carry out a journey, that we wind up respecting and elevating above your everyday heroes, right? So the hero is not the guy that goes out and slays the dragon and then comes back with hordes of gold and he's now the lord of the town, right? That's actually not the hero in most of these games and most of these stories. The real hero is the one when the dragon is slaying the countryside and nobody will go face this guy. He rides out alone, and he rides out alone and he challenges the dragon and he finds a way to kill and overcome the dragon. And perhaps he or she dies in the process. And those are the ones we elevated to heroes. And why did we elevate them to heroes? Because there was no money in it for them. There was no wealth or incentive in it for them. They weren't going to, quote, get something after they finished and got back. What they were getting was they were saving their fellow human beings. They were defending their home or their family. And so they become the heroes. But if you buy into this notion that you can somehow create a fantasy or game world where there's, quote, no money, and by extension, no wealth, right? You can't claim that you have a world with no money, but yet there's still degrees of wealth because money is nothing but a measure of wealth. You know, back in the days when grain and wheat and agriculture were currency, people measured how wealthy you were by how many barns full of agriculture you had, right? It's sort of like the parable in the Bible, the man who had so many barns filled with grain and wealth. He said, wow, I've got more than I'll ever be able to need to sell or spend or barter. I'm going to tear them down and build some new ones. So money in that sense, you can't separate money from wealth. But if you do that, if you do decide that you're going to create a game world, a role-playing world where there's no money, and by extension, no wealth, then you have to also realize that you now have no conflict. And so rather than having heroes that are going out and doing all of these things and they have the chance to be a hero, right? Now, maybe they won't. Maybe they will decide they're going to go for the gold or they're going to go for the money or there's not enough person that for me to take on that band, me and my guys to go there and challenge that band. But if you eliminate that, right, you go from a world full of the heroes to basically a world full of sycophants. Right? People who just run around and do things for other people that have something to give them. And there's nothing heroic about that.